And Luke, you're calling in from Peru?
Yeah, the Sacred Valley of Peru. It's right near Cusco.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to call in and finding some good Wi-Fi to connect with us. There's so many things I want to cover. I know we were talking about like the brain scans and plant shamanism combined with neurofeedback and all that data, and I want to get into that stuff, but maybe we start a little about your journey of how you came to be the founder of Tiwaz and what that is, and but maybe we start a little bit with your military service and how it led to where you are now.
Yeah, so I joined the military. I joined the Marine Corps in 2003. Not too long after 9/11. Did have patriotic duty. That patriotic fervor at the time. After 9/11, you had the Iraq War and Afghanistan, Iraq just starting off right about then. And I eventually deployed to Afghanistan in 2011. And I actually transitioned to a airborne infantry unit, National Guard, because I never got deployed in the Marines. And yeah, that's how I deployed with. So that's how my career started.
Gotcha. How long were you over in Afghanistan?
I was in country for 9 months.
Got you. Got you. And then so how did that kind of lead you to where you are today?
Well, so originally, like the Marine Corps was my life, and everything was built on this military path. And actually, I was in the OCS officer program. I went to the juniors and seniors, and I had this encounter with a police officer that just this horrible story. He was a neighbor that was pissed off at me, but he ended up beating me up, and it's a longer story to that. But basically, like smashed my face into concrete, and there's like blood coming out, and there's probably head trauma with that, and but then I got charged without resisting at all, with resisting arrest, even though he didn't even say I was under arrest. He was like an angry neighbor, and so I joined this airborne infantry unit to get a deployment under my belt, go to Afghanistan, and come back and get in the officer program again. And all these events came together at the same time. So this event of losing my commission was very traumatic for me because like my whole life was geared to be a Marine Corps infantry officer. That was like my dream.
Mm.
And then, and for me, there was no like greater honor or responsibility than doing that. And so that's what I really was driving towards. So in Afghanistan, it was really amazing being in the country. I loved experiencing it. I was outside the wire every day, training the Afghan National Guard or Afghan Army and Afghan police. But I started becoming disenchanted at the time with the war, everything. And then I saw there's multiple situations where in my opinion, my life was on the line for kind of even incompetence, which, at the time I didn't mind dying in a firefight, but I didn't want to die because someone made a bad decision or it was just a ridiculous decision. So that's some of the stuff that was going on. So after I left Afghanistan, it was like a big search for identity and who I was, because I think lots of veterans have this identity. We were so built into that role, and you identify with this as who you are. So for me, this was going to be my whole life, my whole career path, and then I had to find something else. So eventually this led me to Peru. I heard a Joe Rogan podcast back in the day. This was about 10 years ago now, or a little longer. I came down the first time 10 years ago, this coming December, but I started researching it a couple years before that. So,
Which do you remember which guest was on Rogan that you heard of that you heard
yeah,
about?
no, I remember distinctly. Her name was Amber Lyon, and she was a CNN reporter. She went on Joe Rogan. She was reporting on the color revolutions that were happening in, I think or the Arab uprisings that were happening around that time.
Mhm.
So our media was reporting on Egypt and countries that were basically not on friendly terms with, but we weren't reporting what was going on in our countries where we had bases at that were friendly to us. So she risked her life basically sneaking out all this footage and SD card, and she put it in her bra because people risked their lives giving interviews and everything else, and CNN refused to air it. And so she aired it anyway on YouTube and was fired, actually, for airing it. And she goes to Joe Rogan, and this was, this was like 10 years ago now when Joe Rogan was as big as he is now. So she goes on Joe Rogan, tells him the story, and she goes, hey, or Joe Rogan tells her, hey, why don't you go down and try ayahuasca? And she goes down, comes back, does another interview with him, and she had a very profound experience. But I remember part of it was she saw trauma spray paint on a wall. So just being in these war zones, she picked up all this trauma, and ayahuasca helped her release that. So for me, I'm like, well, I don't have anything else to do. I don't know what I'm doing, so I'll go try that.
Yeah. Okay. And so you're at that time, you hear that Rogan episode and you're kind of transitioning. Have you left the military by that time?
I just left. It's like
Yeah.
right after I left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And so you hear that episode and you found a retreat center in the Sacred Valley to go try the
No, my
medicine.
first retreat was in the jungle in Iquitos. I'm not sure if you're
Okay.
familiar with it, but it's pretty much like the ayahuasca epicenter of the Amazon, and
Hmm.
it's the only city you can reach by you can't reach by road, only by plane or boat.
Hmm.
So it's really kind of, for me, it was really Indiana Jones-esque. You come in this airplane, and and you're right in this jungle city, and yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's part of it, right? It's kind of like the pilgrimage and the adventure.
No, for sure. So when I was in Iquitos, it was a 10-day retreat. The first 4 days, we just went in canoes through the jungle, and it's such a foreign place. It was so healing just doing that. And I
Hmm.
remember telling this beautiful facilitator, I'm so enchanted at everything. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. This is changing my life. And she gives me a little smirk, and she goes, wait till you try ayahuasca.
And so I guess you had a good transformative experience when you tried it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it was life changing.
Hmm.
So I would say before I tried ayahuasca, I mean, I was always interested in things. I was a reader. I think I always had my spiritual side to me, but it was very intellectual, if that makes sense. I grew up Catholic. I was on a searching path. And I think I was probably even an atheist for a while, like in college and stuff. And, reading like Richard Dawkins at the time and stuff like that. And then I was still kind of on this path, and all of a sudden it became very apparent that like we are ensouled beings in these ceremonies. I saw auras. I saw basically these kind of experiences that would be called spiritual rapture,
Hmm.
where I've read about in history books, never anything experienced like that. So it was very life changing, and it's interesting because people talk about these things, but it set me on a different course in life, a whole new trajectory.
Hmm. Hmm. And so that trajectory was to start a center to help other people to kind of have the similar transformation that you were able to have.
Well, it's interesting because at the time I remember looking out across the Amazon, and there's nothing out there. So you can see the whole Milky Way, and just that experience is beautiful. And I remember thinking that, yeah, this something's gonna be different. I'm not sure what yet. And I remember wanting to reconnect with the European traditions of shamanism and our old past. So that was really the thought at the time,
Hmm.
and it took time to evolve. That was about 10 years ago. I came back and forth in the jungle, and more things evolved after that.
Um, I'm curious, I don't know what the European traditions of shamanism are. Did you discover any of that stuff?
Well, so I specifically into like the Nordic traditions, like the runes and stuff like that. So if you look at the Nordic traditions, like Odin, Wotan is a very shamanic figure, hanging from the Yggdrasil tree. That's how you get the runes. There's all kinds of shamanic symbolism, especially in Northern European traditions. So it has been lost or maybe suppressed for, maybe 1,500 years since Christianity, but there is that basis that exists in Europe. So
What do they say? The Vikings were taking mushrooms, right? That's the rumor that I heard?
yeah, no, there was some kind of psychedelic use, and usually probably mushrooms, the Amanita mushroom, or possibly different mushrooms as well. So yeah, there was definitely psychedelic use and entheogenic plants. Yeah.
And your symbol for your retreat is a rune, right? Is that what Tiwaz is? Is that a rune?
Yeah, correct. It's the warrior rune, a Tiwaz rune. So it's a very to me it's a very noble rune. So it's honor. It's not just about fighting or violence. It's that the noble warrior.
And is your retreat center specifically for veterans only?
No, it's basically for anyone. I
Mhm.
mean, we have hiking and martial arts, so it's kind of geared for more your adventurous type. But we do focus with veterans because, I'm a veteran myself, and I think it's just a great thing to have, like, when veterans come down, to have veterans on staff working with them. I think it's a really powerful thing.
Exactly, yeah. And we've had a few veterans on here who have done various retreats and a couple who went to Tiwaz.
Yeah, no, Rob, I heard your interview with Rob and Faith. That was really great, and they both came down. It was amazing. So they're good friends of mine.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, Rob Kugler and Faith Phillips were both on the podcast, and they spoke very highly of Tiwaz.
Yeah, no. So Rob came down. He was actually in my unit.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah, like in Nebraska. We're both in the same Marine Corps unit, Marine Corps Reserve unit, and
Amazing.
you know, it's kind of interesting because like I went on my path in Peru, and I wasn't using social media much at the time. I was like, hey, you see Rob? He's traveling around the country with his dog, and he's wrote this book, and he's on Today Show. I'm like, yeah, what's going on? And we talked, and like, hey, why don't you come down to Peru and try ayahuasca? So it was really powerful to see him again, have that experience with him, and we're actually making a process, making a documentary of his experience and that whole retreat. So
Oh, that's awesome. Do you know when that's supposed to be out, or don't know yet?
it should be finished by the end of August, and
Okay.
then we're not sure how we're releasing it yet. I have to talk to the filmmaker because we definitely want to like present at film festivals because I think it's gonna be really cool.
Yeah. So how long? I think it'll be cool too. You have to keep us posted on that
Sure, yeah.
when that comes out. So when did you you tried the medicine for the first time, and then what happened in between before you started Tiwaz?
So I was kind of going back and forth between the states, and after the military, I started working for my friend's small railroad construction company. We built railroad crossings across the country,
Uh-huh.
which is a cool job, especially for me at the time. I had like extreme anxiety after my deployment, and I was never diagnosed with PTSD, but definitely PTSD symptoms. And that's just because I never went to the VA and talked to them about it.
Yeah.
But so I was traveling the country doing construction, and then it was nice because it's a friend in a small company. I'm like, hey, is it all right to take some time off, like 6 months, to go to Peru? And he's like, yeah, I guess, okay. So it was a good job to have to kind of come back and forth. So I was coming back and work, going back to Peru, and I for different times I was living in the jungle for months at a time with shamans and really deep, not like a retreat center, which is nothing wrong. We have a retreat center, but
Yeah.
like the kind of place like you feel like at the edge of the world. It's just my friend and I and a shaman, and we're just in a deep, deep Amazon doing ayahuasca ceremonies and yeah.
And you're just like sleeping in a hammock or like no electricity, no running water,
Yeah,
that
no
kind of thing.
electricity, no running water. Our shower was like 3 buckets of water a day as we had, or 2 or 3, I don't remember. And I wish I had more because it was really hot. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but
When
it all
I
brings you to that medicine though, because that when you don't have anything else to do, you can really focus on that medicine path.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, when I was in Brazil a year ago, same thing, no running water, no electricity, and we just bathed in the river.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I'm sure that was an interesting experience. So,
Yeah.
like, were you doing medicine in Brazil? And then,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep. Yeah, we were spending time with the Huni Queen.
Oh, they're
Um,
great.
yeah, so they're an indigenous tribe from the Brazilian Amazon, and they had a festival where they let like 40 or 50 Westerners in to kind of learn about their traditions and
Okay.
experience the medicine and kind of live in the jungle and do all that. So yeah, I got to do that last year. It was amazing.
No, I think I've heard about that festival. I want to visit it. It sounds really neat. They visit my area of Peru once in a while, and it's a different style. So mostly I've worked with the Shipibo tradition. That's the tradition that's most common here in Peru.
Yep.
There's other traditions as well. So the Shipibo tradition is very deep. It's like deep, deep soul work, like deep. And it's good. It's healing. And then I remember doing the Huni Kun, like I think the beginning of the ceremony is it's more of that, but then by the end the fire is going and people are dancing and playing music and I mean, okay, this is nice. After all that
Yeah.
work, doing a ceremony like that was really cool.
Yeah, they have the part where they have that work part in the beginning, and then they
Yeah.
bring some more light into the room and there's more movement. Where I've heard with the Shipibo, it's like complete darkness, no movement, like just really deep inward
No,
work.
yeah, I mean, for them, it's not even like no music playing, just the Icaros, just it's good. I mean, I really value it, but I appreciate there's different styles too. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you got to sit with a couple different styles.
yeah, no, I think that's the beautiful part of the medicine path. There's so much depth to it. I mean, it's something to explore forever. Shamanism is just so complex.
For sure. So, okay, so you're working the construction job and now you're going back and forth to Peru and you're spending more and more time deeper in the jungle. And what happens next along your path? Because just like you said, the path can go on forever. You can keep learning. So, kind of where did you go next and what did you learn next?
Well, actually, my friend from Omaha, Nebraska, she was doing what's called QEEG brain mapping and neurotherapy, and it
Mhm.
was really rare at the time. It's still pretty rare now. And she goes, "Hey, I'll do a brain map on you." And she did a brain map on me, and it was really cool because she goes, "Okay, you have this pattern." What she says, like, this pattern's related to PTSD, anxiety, and insomnia.
Okay.
And I mean, for me, being in the Marines, I was never going to go to talk therapy, or I never wanted to go the traditional drug route either because I've always been kind of like natural and didn't want to go that way. So this is a whole different perspective. And she goes, okay, we just train these brainwaves down to help, heal your system and bring your nervous system down and heal this trauma. And this just sounded so much different. It was almost more like a like biohacking or a video game, or it takes a stigma away too, because like, oh wait, it's not me. I have this brain pattern related to this, and then I can like work on that brain pattern.
That's fascinating. I'm super curious about this. Can we start at like a very base level? Like, how do they even do the brain mapping? Are they attaching kind of wires to your head and it goes into a computer, or how does this work?
So yeah, it's if you've seen an EEG like in the hospital, the raw brain waves,
Yeah.
we do a QEEG. So we put like a 19-point electrode cap on the head, which is the standard cap, and then it reads all your brain waves. So alpha, beta, theta, delta. It reads all those brain waves. And what we do is there's different mapping systems. And you put this, so a mapping system has a database, a QEEG mapping system is a database because it's quantitative.
Mhm.
So we compare one brain map to like hundreds of thousands of other brain maps. So when we compare it to these large data sets, and over time, statistically, the people who developed these brain mapping systems have we found patterns associated with anxiety, depression, head trauma, ADD, pretty much everything you think of, and we can
Yeah.
see in the brain pattern. So yeah, put the cap on, it reads your brain waves, they take the map, they go back and review it, and then they go over the map with you and like, hey, this is what we're seeing in your brain.
Got you. And so I'm curious what the next step is. Um, but I've heard, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, that this technique, it's almost like you go into meditation and you kind of get yourself into the back of your brain, which is I've heard it's called like the primal brain or the ancient brain or the animal brain. And then that is where there's old trauma patterns. And then somehow you're able to move to the front of the brain into a more higher consciousness after you've healed those trauma patterns. Is this a similar thing to QEEG or am I way off?
Yeah, so there's different styles of, so the QEG is just a map.
Got
And
it.
then from the map, we choose how to train the brain.
Mhm.
And then when you train the brain, many different styles of neurofeedback and neurotherapy.
Mhm.
So it depends what you're using. So like some of the technology we use, people will start in the back of the brain and work forward. So once the back of the brain is regulated, they'll work forward. And there's different centers for spirituality in the brain. And
Interesting.
yeah, yeah.
Is that like an actual location in the brain?
Well, for me, I look at I mean, there's probably deeper brain structures that I can't really see with my technology, but like I'm looking at the top of the brain, the overall map. So those deeper structures are connected all the way up to the cortex of the brain, outside the brain. So So I know where I place electrode, for example, on like we have different locations. We call it like PZ. That's the primary location to access a lot of those spiritual states and where trauma is stored.
Interesting. And is this is just based on they've gathered so many maps and they can see when someone is in like a prayerful state or a meditative state or a state that they would report as spiritual, then that part of the brain is activated as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting where this comes from because I think in the beginning of the field, they were studying meditators. And they
Yeah.
applied a whole map on meditators and they saw what was changed in those maps. And then we can like train that with the neurofeedback. So the neurofeedback training is whatever brainwave we want to train, we reward them for it. So it could be, if you're listening, if it's meditation, it's like a tone.
Yeah.
So it takes a meditator much longer to learn, like years to learn, we can increase it that rate much faster because we show the brain exactly where to go. So we notice the meditators, they have this alpha pattern, and then a certain part of the brain, and then we simply reward the alpha and that we can simulate those same states.
What do you mean by reward it?
So it's operant conditioning is what it's called, but basically so the neurofeedback, the electrode that's in the head, and it reads all those brain waves in that location. So say their alpha brainwave goes above a certain threshold, it gives them a tone or rewards them with a certain sound. So your brain knows like, okay, I hit that threshold, keep going, and then it depends on the software, what you're using, but that threshold keeps increasing and then that reward system, like you keep going for that tone.
Are you able to give an example of the neuro training? Like you tell people, what is an example of how you train someone to get their brain to do something?
So what I tell people is like, usually what I do first of all is I take a brain map. So a typical neurofeedback clinic will always take a brain map first. And the brain map gives you an idea of where the brain is dysregulated. So wherever the brain's dysregulated at, you can target the area to become more regulated. So say someone has like ADD, the classic pattern is a high theta pattern in the front. So you train that down and you train like a focused brainwave up called SMR. So rewards both of them, and they'll be like watching a screen, and that screen would be, the old days, there are lots of like games, like people play, the rewards them the game, but now you just watch a movie, and then like the screen gets lighter, rewards them with the right brainwave, it gets darker, that means the wrong brainwave. So the brain naturally wants to become more healthy, so it's like having a mirror in front of the brain for the first time and showing where to go. Like, oh, okay, and the brain just does it. And you really realize that you really have a mind within a mind. The brain is doing like millions of calculations a second that you can't possibly do. So your brain like does it.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Okay, so during your transition, you're doing construction, you're starting to go to Peru more and more and more, and then you find the QEEG thing. And like what did you discover? You did it on yourself, or can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my friend took that map. I did a few trainings with her, and some of them were really powerful. And there's different kinds of trainings that she was doing. She was using pulsed electromagnetic frequencies. They put coils in the head and put frequencies in the head. And for me, it was almost like a plant medicine experience or a psychedelic experience. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah. And I started reading all these books. Like, so I've always been a big reader, so I started buying all the books I could on the topic. And well, one, just itself, the fact that you can train brainwaves is extremely fascinating. I mean, why are we able to do that? And that alone is interesting. And then I started realizing there's lots of spiritual implications to this. And another thing is it was really helping me out. I was really feeling a lot better with this brain training. So I had the insight of, well, why don't we just combine these plant medicines and neurofeedback and brain mapping? So that's kind of where it started. And the idea was years before I started retreat. It was probably, we started retreat this last year, and it was probably like 7 years ago when I thought I was doing this.
I think it's a fascinating idea. And so were you the first like subject of the experiment to see what would happen if you combined the plant medicine and the brain mapping?
Yeah, so we don't actually combine them at the same time. Actually, you probably could. I know some people do this. I met one person, she goes, she's one of the top people in the field. She goes, yeah, I have PTSD, so I do mushrooms and do alpha theta training, which is like a deep state training.
Wow.
That sounds cool, yeah. But basically, I was kind of doing it in tandem. So I would be doing plant ceremonies, and I'll also be doing, ayahuasca, when I had a chance when I was in Peru. And I noticed over time, so for me, when I first did ayahuasca, as it was a very, very powerful experience, and I felt great for like 3 months. I felt like I got everything figured out, felt really good. But over time, that experience started to fade. So
Mhm.
then really the neurofeedback became my daily practice to like re to get me where I want to go, to keep that progress going.
If someone wanted to do neurofeedback, like were you doing it on your own, or do you have to go into a lab or a clinic to have this done, or is this something people can do on their own?
Well, so um, generally speaking, you have to go into like a clinic. I remote train people now anywhere in the world. So so what happens with my retreats, and we'll go into this in a little bit, but people come in, they do a pre-map and then a post-map. We look at the changes over time at the retreat, which is really powerful because it's very validating. It shows them that this is not just a psychological experience, but you actually see the neuroplasticity, you see the change in the brain. And then we give them the option of having a home unit to take home with. And it's a clinical grade unit where it's the same kind of training in an office. We can do it remotely now, which is really powerful. That was not a thing like 20, 30 years ago.
That's fascinating. So I'm guessing it's something that they buy, and it's maybe like a set of headphones and some type of computer, and then they maybe have like a Zoom call with you or something.
Yeah, so it's like they buy the unit, um, and then there's like a monthly charge for like the classes or what I do them. So I do a Zoom call to start them out, show them where the place the electrode's at, and remotely I can see all their training on the screen. So I can see like, okay, I can see their brain normalizing here. Then I'll choose different locations depending on like what our goals are and stuff like that. So like, all right, we'll do 10 sessions here. We'll adjust locations, and as they progress. So how I look at it as most clinics, for example, that do neurofeedback, they're working with like standard things like anxiety, depression, head trauma. When it's very powerful, it's really good for all those things. So they say usually around 40 sessions is what people need. So it's like going to the gym. So it's
Wow.
like 40 sessions to treat most things like that. Now everyone's kind of different. If you have like really severe trauma, it might take longer. But generally speaking, most people can have like profound results in that period of time.
I've heard it's permanent too with the
Yeah.
neurofeedback.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. No,
amazing.
I mean, no, it's life changing for people. So basically, after 40 sessions, you'll have a better brain. You'll like, be upgraded, which is, better
Yeah,
you.
I've heard people, this may be like a controversial term, but I've heard people describe it as higher states of consciousness. Like once you've healed your brain, you're now in an elevated state of consciousness.
Well, I would say for sure. And actually, so the next part I was going to say is after the regulating the brain, taking depression and trauma away, then I actually work on spiritual training. So like meditation, deep states, and stuff like that. Because once you pull the trauma out, that's when that can start. But yeah, I would say that, we'll say someone's living in anxiety, you pull the anxiety out, I mean, that itself is a higher state of consciousness. They're going to be operating more from like their true self than
And more
stress.
presence, more present in
Yeah.
the moment rather than anxious about the future or past.
Yeah, for sure. And you can tell in the brain, like these are patterns in the brain. So the mind, brain, soul, those all related. So you regulate the brain, you regulate the mind, and then the true soul, how I look at it, I literally look at it as like Jungian individuation. So Jungian talk about the conscious mind, the subconscious, and he did it through dreams, but we're doing that through neurofeedback. We're linking that together. So we regulate the brain, we heal the brain, we take out any head trauma, we work on that, we work on anxiety, depression. And then after that, we can work in those deep states. And my favorite is called alpha theta. It takes people to the subconscious. And a lot of people have like subconscious, like our archetypal symbolism and things like this. So it's very powerful. And often by doing this, their dreams will become much more vivid. So for them,
Interesting.
yeah. So I'll tell them to like, okay, make sure you journal your dreams, because then for me, it's a wholeness to the process. You just don't want to do the brainwave training. You want to do everything else with it to make you get the most out of it.
Can you talk more about like the spiritual implications and like doing more of the spiritual training and getting into alpha theta? Can you describe like more of the benefits of that?
Yeah. So I think for me, this is the most interesting part of the field. And most clinicians probably don't talk about this because they want to be very scientifically oriented, which I understand. You're trying to get accepted by the medical community and everything else. But some of the founders of the field are very, very spiritual people.
Yeah.
The person that found Alpha Theta or discovered this or kind of invented that protocol, he actually was studying yogis and meditators and was trying to study like people like Tesla, inventors, these people, these aha moments, what kind of mental state we're in, and see if we could recreate them.
The big download people.
Exactly. Yeah. No. So Alpha Theta is different than meditation. It'd probably be closer to that kind of download type state. It's called hypnagogia, between sleep and awake. You know, before you go to bed, you have like, you know, maybe images pop in your mind. This is the state we take people on. And once you realize like this is that connection to the subconscious, when people first start going to this state, this is where trauma is stored. So this is very, very powerful for releasing trauma. And I mean, I think
it can be uncomfortable.
It can be. So people with a lot of trauma, I just had a client this week. She goes, "Hey, is it normal to cry after doing this?" I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, you're releasing trauma. That's normal. Just take it easy with yourself, you know, ground, go for walks, stuff like that. Energy work always goes really well with that." So, but just like plant medicines, take some of the charge away from that, maybe relieving trauma and stuff like that, even though it can still be challenging.
Yeah.
But a lot of people also, like I have another person I'm working with, he goes, "I just feel really exhausted every time I do it." Because it's like that process can be exhausting. And for him, he doesn't have any visions or anything, but just the process itself can like really exhaust the system because the system's processing all this trauma, whether he knows it or not. And for me, when I was doing it, I didn't have any like visions like some people, but I would feel like something was like unwound. My mentor calls it like unties knots, you know, or other people call it like dredging the subconscious. So I would just kind of like go into it and come out and like, oh, okay, I feel better. Like, and like something was like released, even though I wasn't sure what it is.
Yeah. So you have a mentor in like a neurofeedbacking mentor?
Yeah. So how I got into this, I was reading all the books on it, and I go to the conferences, and these are all medical doctors and neuroscientists, and I'm just a guy with an idea, you know. And I walk in there and I go, I have this idea to use brain mapping, neurofeedback, and plant medicines, and this is why I met my mentor. And he goes, "I've been waiting to meet someone like you. I'll train you." And well, okay, I guess I've been waiting to meet you. And it was really serendipity. He's one of the top people in the field. He had a lot of people that are really advanced in the field really see neurofeedback as like a how the West will spiritually transform itself. This is the technology that will do it. So for him, like, "Hey, Luke, like everyone else is working in clinics here. We don't have time to do this, but you want to go to Peru and do this? Like, you're a field researcher. Like, I'll help you out. Let's do it."
That's so cool. And do you mind sharing, what is your mentor's name?
Dr. Richard Soutar.
Got you. Oh, did you say that? Sorry.
Maybe I did. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, he's written a number of books. He has like over 500 clinics that uses his technology. There's different technologies in the field. And it's been amazing studying under him. And his company's helped me out and got some devices and stuff like that. So it's been really cool.
I'm super curious. I feel like for like a Western audience, the conversation gets a little challenging around I'm trying to really crack into what unlocks next after a lot of the trauma is released and then you're training deeper into spiritual states. Like, what do you get out of that?
That's a good question. I was kind of talking to my mentor about it. He goes, "Yeah, when you take this elevator up, you know, you think you've reached top floor, you reach enlightenment, and the people there are like, no, man, it keeps going, you know."
The journey never ends.
Journey never ends. And, you know, what I would say from a year ago is probably different than now, and what I say a year from now. For me, I think it goes back to that Jungian individuation. You become much more you, that true self, and you're operating out of not out of worry, not out of anxiety, not out of like, what should I be doing because society tells me to do. I mean, I really think like you find your soul path when you release all these things. And
I would guess you operate less out of fear. And I know this is like a sometimes controversial word in the West, but less out of fear and live life with more faith.
yeah, no, I agree completely. Someone that's built in, and then, for me, I was in the Marines. I never really thought about like feelings so much. Like, oh yeah, like feelings and being in touch with those, and like, what do I want? How do I feel into that? And intuition, like, and now I feel like I have so much going on that now I have to really like, feel like, okay, what's my priority here? Or what do I want to do or what do I want to accomplish and where to put the effort and constantly that self-reflection of your own consciousness. I was always kind of looking back on it. I mean, it's come with the plant medicine work as well, so they're combined. And I think all these methods should always be complemented by other ones. So I'd say that self-reflection, that sense of self, and I'm not really worried about like mortgages or paychecks, and I know everything's gonna work out. And it has, and the more, it's funny because my biggest concerns before my life were like not living my life. It wasn't really dying in Afghanistan. It was more like, how am I gonna find my mission in life? And then doing these kind of things, you kind of wake up like, wait, I'm doing it. So that's been a huge blessing for me.
Beautiful. So you've done a lot of work in the neuro mapping and plant medicine world. What kind of data can you have a lot of data? Like what can you talk about some of the data and like what results you're seeing?
Yeah, so we're just, well, I just published 2 studies this last year and a half, I think. Well, yeah. So, which is interesting because, like I said, I was in Afghanistan, then we're construction, and now I'm in Peru publishing research, which is really cool.
Awesome. Can we
Yeah,
find that? Can I put the links like down in the show
yeah,
notes?
yeah. I'll send you the links. It's at the New Mind Journal. It's my mentor's journal, and it's an academic review journal. I went through the, 2 or 3, I think 3 different reviews, each article, different PhDs looking it over.
Cool.
The first one was ayahuasca, and we did pre and post maps. And as far as I can tell, I've looked at all the data, but there's no one has done pre and post. People have only done during maps. So this is the first study to track change over time with ayahuasca. And yeah, there's a whole paper on it which goes into it, but the biggest thing we're seeing is that the brain seems to heal in whatever way it's needed, or seems to regulate itself in whatever way it's needed.
So it's almost like someone can drink ayahuasca and in theory what the maps are showing is that whatever needs to be healed in the brain, it happens automatically. The brain does it or the medicine works with the brain and it just happens. And you just kind of have to sit there and do it and it happens to you.
Yeah, so I mean, these maps are in a retreat setting. So most likely in a clinical setting, like they'll be studying like the one alkaloid, and this will do this. So this is exploratory research. So we're not like necessarily going for that either. We want to like track the whole experience. So the shamanism, the medicine, and everything else going on, we're tracking changes in the brain. But basically the brain, and I really credit my mentor for this because the mapping system he developed, it's unique from like say mainstream neuroscience. Mainstream neuroscience looks at brains differently than what we do because the neurofeedback field, we look at brains like more of like a clinical way to heal them. So we're looking so our mapping system really tracks emotional states or different, and we understand how the brain holds trauma, emotional trauma, which mainstream neuroscience maybe more looks for like a brain tumor or epilepsy or a physical trauma, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So we're looking at like different markers for emotional trauma.
How is the brain holding on to that stuff? You're seeing it in the form of like a brain wave.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Okay, yeah. And
it
you,
sounds out there. It's kind of out there for me too. Like, how we see this stuff. But yeah,
but I think I get it. The idea is there's a brainwave somewhere in there that's maybe not so balanced, and you're kind of bringing more order to the wave itself.
so if you look at like a topographical map. It looks like you just see the head, and you see like delta, theta, alpha, and beta. So there's different ways how the brain compartmentalizes trauma. So the brain literally compartmentalizes trauma to avoid feeling it
Mm.
as a defense mechanism. So some people will see like a high alpha pattern, which is a busy mind that can't slow down. Some people we might see like a ADT or brain dreaming pattern. They're dissociating. There's a number of different patterns we'll see, and those are ways to avoid trauma. So I think my mentor developed this brain mapping system. So for me, this is really amazing. Like, okay, we have this mapping system. We can see these things, and we're seeing plant medicine heal these traumas different ways. For me, this is huge because this can, as far as I know, this is only something in our field, and specifically my mentor. So this is potential whole new model of trauma, right? And we're seeing plant medicines. So say the brain's overthinking, it'll come down. Say the brain's like underpowered, it may come up. Say like the network's overworking, they'll slow down. Underworking, come up. Even head trauma, like we'll see that reduce. So we're seeing all kinds of data sets that no one else is really looking at because everyone's looking at the acute experience, like what's happening. That's interesting, but no one's like, okay, their brain went from here to here, So
Yeah.
that's what.
That's mind blowing. So for the most part in the data, you're seeing whatever pattern needs to be healed, though, it gets healed. It's not like it can do one thing but not another. It's like whatever someone has, it will work on that.
Exactly. I mean, each person's different, and some people that pattern might be completely away. Some people it might reduce. So, but whatever they're dealing with, that seems to work on that. So whatever they're dysregulated, how we say it, wherever their brain is dysregulated, it seems to become more regulated. And some people might be like, we had one person with a head trauma, Faith. Yeah, you interviewed Faith. She was KO'd. She came in to a retreat a month later. We could see that inflammation pattern in her brain. And after a week, that pattern was pretty much completely gone, which is amazing.
Wow.
And I don't think anyone's published on that yet. As far as I know other people are looking at that, but I think it's a kind of like I think we're the first to do that. And I think
That's like a physical healing. That's not
exactly. That's a physical inflammatory pattern. It's an inflammatory process in the brain that was changed after a retreat with ayahuasca.
That's mind blowing.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really is. So, I mean, these studies I published, I go into like some of the theories on psychedelics, and some people thought in the old days that this would simulate schizophrenia or they'll be unhealthy for the brain. But everything we've looked at, the brain seems to heal from these things. So, I mean, this is huge. I mean,
Are there any theories on why does this work? We have no idea.
For the trauma model, I think where the trauma compartmentalizes it. So if the trauma is reduced, the brain can heal and regulate itself. So because the trauma is stored physically, there's a famous book called like The Body Keeps the Score about trauma, and the whole body does it. The brain does that too. So when the trauma is reduced, then that brain can like regulate and heal itself, and that might increase like even memory, because memory.
I'm thinking like all the traumas are compartmentalized, and so if you can release those compartments, you now actually have compartments that are open to do something else.
Right. You allow for like healthy communication, because for example, when it compartmentalizes the brain, memory, for example, takes all these different sections of the brain to use. So when it compartmentalizes, the first thing to be affected is memory. So you release that trauma, memory might get better, performance might get better, all kinds of things might get better. And as far as the head trauma, I haven't really thought about what the mechanisms may be yet. I don't know if we know.
I was curious if how much your papers did get into theories on psychedelics.
Well, so it's exploratory research. So the biggest thing is I just want to get the data out there. Like, hey, this is what we're seeing. No one's seen this yet.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, actually my mentor is like, well, Luke, why do you think this is happening? And he kind of, just like you said, kind of like trying to stimulate me for a theory. And I kind of went to the theory I just told you just now, that the brain seems to compartmentalize trauma, and this seems to release it. This is a large part of what we're seeing. Mm-hmm. So I think this could really be a whole new Well, I think this model existed with neurofeedback in the neurofeedback community with my mentor, but it's not known at all beyond that. So I think what we're seeing with plant medicines validates that model of trauma being stored in this way.
I see. And so you did a second study as well, or published?
Yeah, so my second study was the first study to brain image Wachuma. There's been absolutely no brain imaging. And if people are not familiar with Wachuma, it's a cactus in the Andes. It contains mescaline, like peyote, but there's many other alkaloids as well. So there's been actually very few studies at all. I don't think there's even any questionnaire studies, or maybe one. The first one was like 2 years ago. So no one's brain imaged it, whether it's QEEG like I do, EEG, MRI, SPECT scan, nothing. So it's pretty amazing with all these billions in research that universities have. And I think what's going on here is like one of the most interesting things going on in the world, even from a sociological, anthropological point of view, you know? And
I agree.
yeah, so like when I have the equipment, I put the study together. I talked to my mentor about it, like, hey, would you want to sponsor this study or his company? He's like, yeah, sure, we'll do it, which is amazing. That would help me out. And it was the first study to brain image Wachuma.
And what'd you find with that?
We're seeing similar things with ayahuasca. So we're seeing that idea that the brain seems to heal in a certain way, that whichever way is needed. So that's kind of the big takeaway from both studies. So for the Wachuma study, we did 10 people pre, during, and post. So 30 maps in all. It's kind of a lot of work. And this first time doing during too, which is interesting.
Mhm.
So we're seeing again, like these plant medicines have like this, all these, it's not like a standard drug where a standard drug moves you in one direction, right? Like these things seem to like move people whatever they're needed, which is beautiful.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I've heard people call the plant medicines, they say that they have their own type of intelligence. And now I start to see why they say they have an intelligence because it seems to combine with human beings in a way that just allows the brain to clean itself in whatever way it needs to.
Yeah, no, it does. And then you bring shamanism in, it has a whole nother level. Because when Faith was at a retreat, the shaman came up to me and was like, hey, because he talks to the spirits of the plants. Because the spirits of the plants said there's something with their head going on. I'm like, well, yeah, I'm seeing the same thing with the head trauma, you know? So
Interesting.
there's different levels to this. And, I think it's part of the beauty of the exploration and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. I hope you'll keep being able to do more and more publishing of your work.
No, that's the plan. I mean, I have a lot of ideas. I mean, there's been a decent amount of work done in the last 10 years, but there's still huge things that need to be done, which is interesting because now that I've published 2 papers, I'm really familiar with all the material that's been published. So now I understand, okay, and then like people have done that, they haven't done that, so I really want to keep working on it.
Yeah, amazing. You mentioned that there's sociological and anthropological sort of implications with this work. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so what I was kind of getting at is that, you know, say, for example, mainstream scientists think this is a bunch of hippie stuff going on in the jungle in South America. Well, people are coming back and changing their lives, right? And people are coming and saying they have experiences. So even if you don't think like shamanism's real or these plants do anything, a lot of people do. So that's from that alone, that's very interesting from a sociological, anthropological point of view. And say for me, I came down, I experienced auras, had these powerful experiences. Say that was all in my head. Well, I did change my life and change the direction of my life. So that alone is interesting. So
Yeah.
I think we should study from that point of view as well.
Yeah, for sure. It feels like, and maybe this is just like the inner hippie in me, but it feels like science and spirituality are kind of re-meeting each other at this time.
Yeah, no, I hope, yeah, I mean, I hope that's part of what I'm doing. And I think it's hugely needed. So at different retreat spaces I've been in, where we say like we're changing the world 1% at a time, and I think that's true. But And it's beautiful. That is true. I also think that we need to change the culture. And how do we do that? Well, I think publishing data for one, building these data sets up, and here's what we're seeing. And then, after a period of time, these data sets get large enough, I think that the scientific community really can't ignore that. I mean, they can't if they want, but like so big of a data set, like it's significant.
For sure, for sure. Do you want to talk about more specifically a little bit about Tiwaz? Because I know that the neurofeedback is something that you guys do there, and that's pretty different from what other retreats are doing. But is there some other things as well that kind of make you guys a little bit different?
No, I think we have like a really, really different retreat. I mean, it was, my vision, and then kind of a few people I brought in, like Chintzia, she's our operations manager, and Bryce, our shaman, and more people as well, Bruno, our black belt instructor. But like for me, started thinking like years ago, kind of bring in that Northern European element. So that's where the rune Tiwaz, that warrior rune. And as time goes on, we want to develop that more, like go into the runes more, like our own traditions, why they're important. So then we also include the brain mapping, which I don't think anyone else in the world does. Maybe one of the retreat does brain mapping, but no one does neurofeedback like we do. So we do pre and post brain maps, and we do the brain training in the retreat. So then we also do martial arts. We do jujitsu and boxing, and it really brings the people into their body. It really brings them what they've learned in those spaces, because so much of ayahuasca is really like those upper chakras, right? So it grounds you and it brings you into your body, which is very powerful. So for me, it's like my dream retreat that I've wanted to create for a long time.
That's amazing.
The first retreat I went to was more adventure tourism. So a lot of retreats, you just go to and stay at a center, which is fine. But my first time in Peru, I wanted to like see the country. So I've always held that model in mind. So we take people to these beautiful hikes in the mountains and go to these high Andean mountain communities that no other retreat, does. We really haven't experienced the local culture, and just these really unique things that we love. All the things that change our lives, we have in our retreat because that's what we love.
That's beautiful, man. I love that. Do you mind? I apologize. Do you mind if I take a quick break to
Yeah.
use the restroom, and I'll be right back?
All right, sounds good.
Pushing forward the scientific understanding of human possibilities and potential.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge. So one of the greats in the field, Elmer Green, he the one involved in alpha theta therapy, alpha theta protocol. It was very much about peak potential, raising human beings to their greatest potential. And I think what we do with the neurofeedback and the brain training is so much part of that. It just makes sense. If you have a healthier brain, you're gonna be a better you, but there's no limits to that. Once you bring your brain to a healthy state, you can train all these other states as well. So peak performance is huge in my field. And when I go to these conferences, the Olympic team is there, CEOs are there, anyone looking for an edge is there. And I don't think peak performance is more than just like a professional field. It's these spiritual states too. Like how do we get to these states? So I think it's all together. I think it's very beautiful. And it's this beautiful construct that I think that the world's going to move towards in the 21st century. I think that this needs to be the century of consciousness because it's so important. And I think that the science, that so many people look at science as an enemy, and maybe rightly so in some ways, now we can use it to heal, now we can use it insight, now we can use it to like look into the human nature of consciousness.
Absolutely. And speaking of the sort of sociological and anthropological implications, I can just imagine, if, an X percentage of the world population did this and healed their brain, what would the world look like? It'd probably be pretty amazing.
No, I mean, I think, well, the people in the field, they're true believers, and I am too. Like any day now, the world's gonna hear about the technology. It's so powerful. It's almost like sometimes we get a little embarrassed talking about it because all the things it can do. I mean, but if you think about it, if we can like target different areas of the brain, how much of what we deal with is the brain? I would say most health problems are probably because of an overactive nervous system.
Yeah.
So if we can directly access that, wow, what can that do? How can that change? So I mean, we're going against powerful forces, I think, with the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, the prescription drug model is very much entrenched of how people look at the world, how, I mean, I don't call it healing, but that's how people think of it. It's like, oh, well, I take this drug. So, for example, ADD medication, you can sell that to someone for their entire life, or you can train their brain to become more efficient and not have not have the issue.
Yeah, yeah. I call the and I do acknowledge that the pharma stuff it helps some people, but I call it palliative care for life.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it has its place, and I think it can do some amazing things, especially if, if someone's suicidal or something and need like something like emergency something. But I think for healing, I think we need to look at all things because actually I was talking to a psychiatrist down here, and he prescribes obviously prescription drugs to people. You know, probably wouldn't say this in the States, but I'm in Peru. I can kind of say what I want. And he was a retreat space, and we're all doing medicine. You know, I'm like, well, you prescribe prescription drugs to someone without taking a brain map is like a heart doctor prescribing heart medication without taking someone's blood pressure. Because we know what every prescription drug does. And ADD has 4 different subtypes, for example, and many different things have that. So just by talking to them, you might hit that brain pattern, you might not, you don't know. So I think at minimum, we should look at brain mapping for prescriptions, prescribing. There's no reason not to. So
For sure. I want to try this neurofeedback thing. I'm curious, like you said you do it remotely. Is that something though that someone has to have, you have to have the machine on, I have to have the machine on my end for it to work, right?
yeah, no. So usually, yeah, you'd have the machine on your end, um, which wouldn't be that hard to do. I just mail you a machine,
Yeah.
and you can train, yeah, remotely wherever you're at.
I want to try it actually. I might hit you up after this and order one.
No, let's do it. I'd love to like talk to you about it, and then you get a better sense of what it's about, you know. And I mean, for anybody, like, why not be better? I
I think
think
it'd be really cool to do a before and after podcast episode too.
no, that'd be really cool. I'd love to do that because then you can go into like, hey, what, and it also is like what your changes were, but like what your goals are, and that's fun too. Like, what do you want to do? What do you want to accomplish? Like, what are you passionate about? Because when people come with that passion, I bring all my passion and want to get them to the best level they can. And I had one person who was just did it for 2 weeks, and they said, like, oh, it's a basic protocol that we've had for a long time, but it's very, very powerful. And he goes, Luke, I haven't been going out. My ex-girlfriend's friends with all my friends, so I don't go out ever anymore. But I went out. I saw her ex-boyfriend. I shook both their hands. I was really friendly about it, and this was before it had been really challenging for me. But just that training for 2 weeks allowed him to adjust and shift and do what you need to do there. And then for someone like you that's more creative, like these creative states are just so powerful. And like I said,
Like
these
flow states.
flow states, things like this, like, I mean, people invented this stuff were really intelligent people that were looking like, how do people come up with ideas? How do people become, where is that at? I think I forget what it's called, but there's the Juilliard Music School. There's an equivalent school in England, like the top music school in England.
Okay.
And one of the things I do is neurofeedback with them because the only thing that's proven to increase creativity, and they do the alpha theta protocol. So it's the only thing. Yeah. So there's some people that specialize in opera singers, for example, or like if you think about, there's a number of Nobel Prize physicists or Nobel Prize winners in the 20th century who credit their ideas from taking a psychedelic. I think like LSD, for example, and DNA synthase.
I was gonna say I forget the name, but I heard the rumor that the guy who discovered like the DNA helix
Yes, I
said
think
I think he said he was on acid when he like
yeah.
came up when he figured it out.
I need to make a list because it's really interesting because I know there's like at least 2, I think 3 or 4, and well, what are those states, right? I think we can get these same states. We train them. That's what people don't think about. Like we think of like plant medicines. It's like, okay, this state just happens to us, but we can train these states. So I think it's also important to realize that meditation, for example, those are brain structures we're strengthening by training. So we learn how to train them, and same thing with creativity. We can strengthen those brain structures by training them. So those are all things that we can access with technology, and I think in the future, as this increases, they'll be more powerful.
I love it. I'm so game to try this. I'm like, I
Cool.
want to do it.
Awesome.
I'm curious, the brain mapping stuff, I could talk to you about it all day, but for the people listening who maybe are getting curious and maybe they want to come try out Tiwaz, could you run us through like what does a typical retreat look like if someone books in and they want to come check it out? Are they how long are they there and what does this entail?
No, so the retreat, I mean, really, I love all this stuff, but the retreat's my passion because I'm throwing all these things together in it. And there's a balance too. So when you create a retreat, I mean, I've worked for retreat centers, I've seen how other people do things. So just like leadership in the Marine Corps, you learn from the best and you take out what you don't like, you know. So I really realized that, the other retreats had some good models, but I wanted to put my own style in. And for me, the brain mapping is so powerful. So what you can expect with our retreat, we do 9 days. Most retreats are like 1 week or 2 weeks, depending. Most, I know in Peru, like kind of 1 week, and then you can do longer diets for extended periods of time, which I think you know about.
Yeah, we just had Bryce on the other week talking about plant dietas.
Okay, yeah, no, he's done some amazing dietas, like really, really, like 3 months isolation and like, yeah, isolation. And when you talk about diet, I mean, it's tough. Like, I think the longest I've gone is 5 weeks because there's no salt. So two
I
weeks
had
in,
a I
yeah,
had a buddy who they just did a diet in Brazil and
okay,
they didn't consume water at all or touch water at all for 10 days. And then
wow,
I think the diet continued through another 20 days beyond that where they were allowed to have like it wasn't even water, it was more of like a peanut kind of soup.
yeah.
And so it's like almost no water for a month and no bathing and yeah, it's intense. For the people listening, I would recommend to check out the episode with Bryce because he gets into the details on the benefits of these kind of diets.
No, Bryce, I mean, we work with Bryce because he's been so, well, I met Bryce 6 years ago, I think, or 7 years ago now. And talk about a person that's committed. I mean, it's just few people I met are like have this kind of commitment and a good heart, which matters. I read a quote once, don't mistake ability for enlightenment. A lot of these shamans might have ability, but doesn't mean they're good people. And that's why I love Bryce. He's a good heart, good soul, and I really appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, I like him a lot too. So sorry, I got sidetracked a little bit thinking about diets, but when someone comes into your retreat, we were talking about kind of what it looks like for someone booking in with you.
Yeah, so we do a 9-day retreat. We do 3 ayahuasca ceremonies, one wachuma ceremony. We also do a hike to Asangate. It's one of the most sacred mountains. I think the most sacred in the area and one of the most sacred of the Andes. And it's the mountain itself is 25,000 foot. We go to a town at 14,000 foot.
Wow.
So it's basically the town we go to at the base of it is high as any mountain in Colorado, pretty much, or higher. And there's hot springs there. And when we go on this hike the next morning and talk about just beauty and awe, you're hiking the Andes like this. So we include, so yeah, they arrive on a Sunday, kind of the day for reception. We go through some Indian traditions of thanks, and then we start off with we do 3 ayahuasca ceremonies, one Monday, one Tuesday. Take a day off Wednesday. If people want to go to Machu Picchu Wednesday, they can go Wednesday. Thursday, we do our third ceremony. We do the hike to Asangate. We drive out there and we hike it. We're out there on a Friday night. We go to the hot springs. That morning, wake up at 4 in the morning, and we go out and hike the mountain. So it's a lot of it's taking what we've learned and applying it. And we also have 2 jiu-jitsu classes. Some people get nervous about jiu-jitsu and think it's gonna be like super crazy and like everything is geared for where you're at skill set wise. But just knowing a few things can be so powerful. And your jiu-jitsu is a lot more like chess, for example, than like a street brawl. People think it's just like hardcore, and it is hardcore. It can be hardcore, but we present in a way that is very it's wherever you're at in jiu-jitsu. So for us, jiu-jitsu is medicine. It's been as healing for me as plant medicines. Really, it's
Oh, wow.
especially, yeah, for me, after I left the military, I really missed that camaraderie, and I also missed the physicalness of it. So, and the brain mapping and the neurofeedback training is very intellectual, which I appreciate. But getting back into the body, the jiu-jitsu is so healing for me and challenging yourself. And every day with jiu-jitsu, you can spar, so you know exactly where you're at. It's not like another martial art with a lot of striking. Maybe you can limit it, you know, how much you can do at full speed. But jiu-jitsu, you can do it all the time. And so you really know where you're at skill set. You can't hide from yourself. You know, you have to face yourself. Okay, this is how good I am, or not good I am, you know? And when I first started, I mean, I'm a pretty big guy. I'm like 6'3". And when I first started, like guys half my size would submit me over and over and over again. So I'm like, well, I have to figure out this martial art is so cool. So we have jiu-jitsu, we have a couple sessions of neurofeedback. We also do acupuncture in our retreat, because I like these different modalities complement each other. For me, it's not just with the plants, it's about how we complement this, how do we get the most out of it, you know? So it's a 9-day retreat, and then at the end of the retreat, do the post map, and we show how their brains changed. So for so many people, that Western mind can be so skeptical, like even me when I first came down. I'm like, okay, I did all this stuff. Was that just in my head? Was that just like a hallucination? But I'm like, well, no, your anxiety's better, depression's better, your new neural pathways opening up. And then we also offer people home training afterwards. So both neurofeedback and plant medicines use neuroplasticity. So we leverage neuroplasticity from the plant medicines with the neurofeedback, because now that trauma is being released, all those networks are really open, and now we can like really train the neurofeedback and really get some cool states going and really reconnect them with the plant spirits, you know, and that's kind of the goal. So it is the goal. So I had a person tell me, I did an experimental thing. I was training for 2 weeks after ayahuasca. And he goes, I feel Mother Ayahuasca. I still feel her presence. And that was exactly what we're going for, because so many people, and for me, when I first started, they start losing that. So idea with his training is to keep that feeling going and that sense of spirit going.
Keep the vibe high.
Right. Yeah. That's huge, because when that vibe's high, it allows them to accomplish their goals, interact with friends and family. They want to, you know, be the best selves. And that's what it's about. It allows you to be your best self.
That's amazing. Out of curiosity, do you ever do an end of retreat brain map and you're just like, oh man, I'm so sorry. Like I don't see any big change here. Does that ever happen?
Well, so, I mean, we see different levels of change, right? But also it's not like change is the whole experience, you know, like their personal experience is experience. And we're just trying to correlate what we're seeing to their experience. So, you know, it's not a competition of like, well, this guy changed more, this guy changed less, or anything like that. And pretty much always I see some change. And sometimes it might be more subtle, sometimes it might be really, really obvious, and sometimes it might be more subtle. And that's all learning too. I think sometimes, like living in Peru, some of the studies I've done, when people do plant medicines all the time, you know, I won't see a dramatic change from like one ceremony if they're like doing it all the time, you know? So it's different. So, but this is all learning too. Like I'm in this learning process. So I'm trying to understand like, you know, where we see change at, and maybe certain brain patterns work for certain plants. Like we don't know that yet. And that research still needs to be done, but I think that will become apparent over time.
And just like you said, you were still learning. So I imagine it could be possible too that you could see the brain scan of someone and maybe it doesn't show a huge drastic change, but they could probably still report, oh, I had a very profound experience. I'd imagine that could be possible too.
Yeah, no, like, I mean, as powerful as what we do is, it's still in its early phases and it still has those limitations. So for example, with meditation, we can measure meditators up to Satori, that unity state. We can't see that. We can see all the way up to it, but we can't see that. So there's probably micro networks going on in the brain we might not be able to see. There's probably some process we can't see that or might not understand. We can see broad strokes, but there's probably subtleties that we might not be able to see yet, and maybe we'll never be able to see. You know.
I don't know like necessarily all the spiritual sort of meditation terms, but are there different levels of spiritual states that you are seeing within the maps?
So as of right now, I think we're still exploring that, and I think that other people have maybe are more experts on this. I talked about Elmer Green. He was studying meditators more. I'm studying more plant medicine, so I haven't really seen that yet. But that's really an interesting concept.
Yeah. Well, cool, my friend. I'm super happy about all this work you're doing. I really want to try it. I think after this show, I'll have to email you and figure out a way for me to try it. I want to get into those to try the EEG or the sorry, I think
The
I
neuro-
keep mixing up the terms, the neurofeedbacking to get some into some creative flow states and some alpha theta training. I'm really interested to try it.
No, yeah, I'd love to work with you on it. It could be, I mean, it's changed my life. It's changed other people's lives. But just to get to like a higher level, I mean, it's so powerful for that too.
One of the fun experiments for this show for me is like I do get to learn all this stuff from all these amazing guests, and then if I want to, I can try it, and it's like now I could have you back, and we can do a before and after, and I think it's a really cool idea.
Yeah, no, I would love to do that. Yeah, you've had some interesting guests on. I saw the UFO. You friend that's in UFOs too, right?
Yeah, my buddy, I think you're talking about Cody, right?
Yeah, yeah, Cody. I
Yeah.
was part of MUFON in Nebraska when I was back in the States. So Mutual
You were what?
UFO, part of MUFON, Mutual UFO Network.
Oh, what? I don't tell me more about that.
Oh, um, so MUFON's a national organization, that's like international, but it's a civilian investigation group. There's a chapter in every state, and so you go out and investigate UFO sightings. So yeah, I was doing that back in Nebraska before I
Did
came
you
down to
ever get to
Peru.
see it? Anything that you didn't know what it was up in the sky?
Well, I had a really cool investigation once, looking into it.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
yeah, no, it was
Can
my
you
first.
can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, so it was my first time. So I knew about MUFON for a long time because I'm kind of a nerd and you know, like, okay, what are these guys doing? I found out it was like 5 minutes away from my house. I was at the University of Omaha. So I'm like, oh, I gotta show up. So it was the only MUFON group that's sponsored by a university. And like there's like um, multiple PhDs that come there. So it's not just like crazy people, like very scientifically minded. So after like I learned about like lens flares and lenticular clouds, most of the time we spent debunking things. So 95% of the cases, like we debunk, like really scientifically. But about 5% of the cases get interesting, you know.
Yeah.
So the one case I had, or I showed my first time, this guy's in the front of the class. I was call it class in a classroom, but the guy's in front of the group, and he was in Williston, North Dakota, working like on the oil boom at the time, and he decided to leave at midnight, and he's driving home across I think I-94 in North Dakota, and it was in the middle of the night, and he sees what he thinks is it's a salt truck, a light flashing, and then he thinks it drives us an off ramp, but he drives by it, and it's a UFO, and it starts following him, and it follows him to this rest stop, and there's all these little things. I always pay attention to details of UFO sightings because for many people, they're very nuts and bolts events. For me, they seem to relate to consciousness in some way. I
Yeah.
take that view,
Yeah.
and so he goes into this rest stop. This Native American comes out, but it's not speaking English, which I find strange. And then he goes in there, and there's a map on the wall, but there's no like arrow that you are here on the map,
Hmm.
which I find strange. And then he goes out and he takes footage of this UFO, and it's a classical like triangle craft with like one dot in each corner and one in the middle. And he's showing this video on the screen. This is my first time showing up. I'm like, what the hell? This is nuts. This is crazy. And he goes on his way. He leaves on the rest stop. I forget what happens to UFO, but he says he gets to Bismarck, North Dakota when the sun's rising. So I used to work up there with that construction company, that small railroad company.
Hmm.
So it was February in the winter. I'm like, wait a second, I bet that sunrise is pretty late in the winter. So I looked it up. Like he left Williston at midnight, and that sunrise is 8:45 in the morning. I look at like that drive should only be 4 or 5 hours, and I raised my hand like, hey, you're missing time. I'm not sure if you're familiar with UFO lore, but like missing time usually implies like an abduction. So the guy's eyes get really big, and the whole group gets like really, really quiet, like for like 5 seconds. And all of a sudden, the guy next to me is like, "Nice catch, Luke," you know, and everyone starts talking. And yeah, and that was a really interesting case. And I actually flew up to investigate it more. But yeah, it was really interesting looking, you know,
I
discovering.
um I I might have a guest on in a few weeks who's doing a documentary about wasn't it, I think it was Peru where they recently found some little bodies. Have you heard about this?
I've heard about it. I haven't looked into it, but yeah, there's some like wild stuff out there.
Yeah, I know a guy who's making a documentary about those little bodies that they found, and I'm thinking about having him on the podcast. I don't know if they're real though. I mean, if I look at the pictures, I'm like, no way. But then when I talk to the guys who are like making the documentary with him, like his cameraman who like went and filmed them, he's like, "Oh man, those
Interesting.
things look he's like they look totally real, man." And they found more of them. I'm like, I don't
Interesting.
know, but
And for me, it's so much of a mystery too. I mean, for me, as far as the UFO phenomenon, like I don't know what's going on. The only thing I'd say there's a phenomenon, something's happening, and it's nothing that we can explain in a traditional manner. But what
yeah.
it is, I think it's really up for debate.
My buddy that you mentioned, you listened to his episode, Cody, who was on the show. He's pretty certain, and I'd have to ask him why he's so certain, but that it's kind of like what you said. It's more consciousness and spirituality based.
Yeah, no, I think some of the leaders in the field, John Mack, I think he was a researcher from Harvard. He believed in that. And there's a really, really good book, if I can recommend one book to people, because it combines kind of spirituality, like Neoplatonism, UFOs, fairies, and it's called Daemonic Reality, not demon, but daemon, the Greek term, because the
Okay.
Christians made it like demons and angels. They made it like black and white,
Yeah.
but the Greeks believe in daemons that existed everywhere, all these entities. So it compares modern UFO sightings to like sightings of fairies. So what we see with the modern mind, because it's the edge of our consciousness, is space people, right? Aliens. But what the ancients saw were angels, demons, gnomes, things like this. And it's a really good book. It makes a really strong case, and it's a beautiful case for consciousness. Like we're interacting with the world in a certain way, and this world's interacting with us in a certain way. So I think it's yeah, young, lots of Jungianism in it. It's a really great book.
Do you remember the author?
Yeah, Patrick Harper. He's an English author. I think it's UR.
Another thing I want to do with the podcast is compile a list of books. I always have guests that recommend really great books. So I want to do a book list for all the listeners and just say, these are all the books we've ever mentioned.
Yeah, no, I think like one book I have to mention would be that book. I think it's really good. And I think it's really good for understanding shamanism too. He goes into shamanism in the book. And I think
Okay.
so the main thesis is that there's this other reality and that throughout history, especially goes into Western history, we've looked at this reality in different ways and described in different ways, but it's always been there. It wasn't until the modern scientific era where we've denied this reality, but there's evidence of it throughout time. So he goes into like religious sightings like Fatima and the sightings of the Virgin Mary, and he goes into UFO sightings and fairy sightings. And he makes comparisons to all these, and there's like themes throughout all these things. And he goes into Neoplatonism. Like these people were really scientifically minded at the time, right? Like they used logic and reason to understand the world. And for them, there was like this world soul. And, you know, we have our normal conscious mind, but there's this other world, this other veil that always exists. And he goes into like William Blake, the imagination, how the imagination is like this factor for reality, understanding reality, how we underestimate this. This is a huge part. So it's imagination with a capital I. So he goes into all these different different facets. And for me, it was really good it was really good reading for me from the Western mind to be able to touch that spiritual world in a logical way to kind of bring you into that. Because it kind of brings you into like these different stories and then like how do we approach this? Because we're so walled off because we think if we can't see it, understand it, or it's not literal, it's not real. But maybe literal and real are two different things.
I do think it's funny, we kind of have the Western approach and, the Western scientists, we don't really acknowledge any other world. But at the same time, I think everyone knows like we can't hear like every sound that exists. I can't hear it. There's this narrow
Yeah.
band of sound that I can hear and color that I can see and like light frequencies that I can see. And there's way more that exists that I'm not able to perceive. I think everyone is aware of that. So then they say, oh, there people that say there's no other world. I'm like, you can see like a very small percentage of the reality that's around you.
I know it's interesting too because the modern mind we can measure all this stuff and it should be very obvious to us, but people still don't think that way because yeah, the visible spectrum is like this small in sound, and the spectrum's actually really huge.
Yeah.
John Keel was another writer about UFOs, but he would talk about how UFOs seem to come in and out of the visual spectrum, and they'd be like ultraviolet light or infrared light, and they'd come in and out that way. I mean, I don't know, but it's interesting to think about, like, because there could be other things all around us that we can't see or experience.
For sure, for sure. Well, yeah, I really appreciate the conversation and all the work you're doing. I'm curious, is there anything else as we kind of get close to wrapping up? Is there anything else you want the world to know?
No, I think our retreats are a really big thing. I mean, that's really where the excitement's at. Eventually, we're going to nonprofit for veterans for our retreats. So we're in the process of building that so people can donate that and sponsor a veteran coming down. I think that's going to be really cool.
Yeah,
And then,
I love that. I love that people have the opportunity to help someone else who maybe is
yeah.
have the means.
And I think what we're doing, I mean, it's just so many parts. We're doing the research, feel free to look into that and you'll link to that, other retreats. But also, if anyone's just interested in neurofeedback, we can train anyone anywhere remotely with that. And that doesn't, you don't have to come to Peru for that. That can be, and sometimes for some people, that can prepare them for their journey for Peru. So just like we do post-training, we can do like pre-training, and then they get maybe more results of their experience if we work on the trauma before they get here, for example.
Yeah, for sure. I want to try the neurofeedback and
Okay.
then do a follow-up episode.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm excited to try that. And you'll send me the links. So I'll make sure that for anyone listening, if you want any of the links that we've talked about, I'll put them in the show notes, like how to find Tiwaz. And I think there was a couple other things, but I wrote them down.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. I'll send you the links. So, I mean, Tiwaz Awakenings are a retreat. I also kind of have my original brand, Neuro Enlightenment, where we could do remote neurofeedback training. And with that brand too, we partner with different retreats that can offer the pre-post brain mapping. So, and then
Amazing.
we're trying to build our Instagram up too, and all that stuff. So it's Tiwaz Awakening.
Fantastic. Well, cool, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
Yeah, and let's keep in touch about the neurofeedback and then we'll do another episode.
All right, sounds good.
Amazing. Thanks so much and bye everyone.